announcements for you all. A lot of this stuff is over at the table for you, which you can peruse at your leisure after the amazing lecture. You can sign the Apartheid Free Communities Pledge. And if you are a graduate student, you can join the Palestine Solidarity Caucus. But also, if you're in South United or United Academics or any way interested in organizing around Palestine, you can join the coalition. So get in touch with your union or come and talk to me or some other people. There's some other people, but coalition members, raise your hands. Talk to any of these? Whoa, look at that. Also, have you guys heard about this global strike for Gaza every Thursday, where we're not spending any money anywhere? Make it a habit. Okay, and then there's a book club happening within Tempest Coalition. Tempest Collective. So that is, the first one's Monday, October 6th, and they're reading Their End Is Our Beginning, Capitalism and Abolition. So if you're interested in that book club or in getting involved in Tempest, go see their table afterwards. We also have a lecture called Ecocide in Palestine happening on Thursday, October 16th, and that is slated for 4:30 to 6 in Aiken. There's some flyers you can pick up over there, and then you can also pick up a book. And then, not lastly, actually, there's one more, but the People's Summit is happening October 25th. It's called Organizing Resistance Against Trump and the Billionaires, and that'll happen over in Winooski from 9 to 7 on that day. So I'll set this on the table as well so you can take this image of the details. And then lastly, they are trying to get our undergrads to join horrible careers, and they're bringing in some pretty bad players to the different career fair events happening in October and November. So we want to show up on October 8th from 1 to 3 in the Davis Center Circle. Out there, there'll be a protest against them bringing in formerly Raytheon, now RTX Corporation, and the FBI at this one in October. And then stay tuned for the November Career Fair, which will feature Global Foundries and Marvel Technologies. Sorry for all the, I don't really know where my face is supposed to be with this. And now we'll have the actual introduction of our marvelous speaker from Miss Mandanix.
Thank you, Ayana. Ayana also helped organize today's event as a member of our board of the speaker series and also our Palestine Solidarity Caucus for Graduate Students United. He's also much taller than me. But welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us at the University of Vermont's Interfaith Center for an evening of radical community and deep witnessing. With the speaker we are honored to have with us, Dr. Maya Wind. Reminder, please turn off or put down on mute. I don't mean the buzz, vibrate mute, but the real committed mute or off. Your phone, your devices, anything that might disrupt the evening. And for 2 decades and counting, the Will Miller Social Justice Lecture Series has cultivated a dedicated space for the very mission that fueled our series' namesake. The radical analyses of social, ecological, and political violence afflicting our communities both here in Vermont and around the world. Late activist educator Dr. Will Miller dedicated his career, including 35 years as a UVM philosophy professor, to speaking truth to power. Will Miller's legacy, as well as our call to action tonight, is truth-telling. Telling the uncomfortable truths, the radical and rupturous truths, the accountable truths, the truths that challenge our colonial consciousness, push us to make the hidden truths visible, and imagine a more just society for all. In Gaza, the truth is that Palestinian peoples have endured 7+ decades of Zionist settler colonial violence, including displacement, expulsion, apartheid, genocide, starvation, and unimaginable crimes against humanity. And at this very moment, as we gather in relative safety at the University of Vermont, Palestinian universities lie beneath rubble. In fact, 12 universities, each and every Palestinian university in the Gaza Strip, have been systematically destroyed by Israel and by every state complicit in Zionist occupation. With schools, libraries, and critical sites of knowledge also under attack, we have a lost generation of students fighting for a sacred right, education. This is scholasticide, the mass destruction of Palestine's knowledge systems. It is systematic, it is intentional, and it is not about the erasure of just buildings and books, but the erasure of entire peoples, and with them their truths, their stories, their ways of knowing and being. Scholasticide weaponizes education, perhaps our most powerful tool for liberation, to control not only who is telling the story, but who is left standing to do so. Tonight, we are honored to hear the story and scholarship of Maya Wind, a conscientious objector, organizer, and scholar. She is the President's and Andrew W. Mellon Postdoctoral Fellow in the Departments of Black Study and Media and Cultural Studies at the University of California, Riverside, and a Fellow at the Freedom and Justice Institute of Scholars for Social Justice. Her first book, available for purchase on this back table this evening, Towers of Ivory and Steel, How Israeli Universities Deny Palestinian Freedom, was awarded the American Educational Researcher Association Division of Curriculum Studies Outstanding Book Award. It has been published and is forthcoming in translation in 6 languages. She is at work now on a second book project, which investigates the reproduction and international export of Israeli security expertise. Lastly, and mostly because this is the point where I'm completely sick of myself talking and I'm really excited for a marvelous speaker to come up here, we want to give a thank you to our sponsors. Israel's occupation of Palestine would not be possible without collaboration and funding from supposedly neutral entities, including and especially universities across the US. Special thank you to those sponsors organizing across our own university, including UVM Graduate Students United, our Students for Justice in Palestine, and UVM Staff United. And thank you also to our incredible co-sponsors, the Vermont Coalition for Palestinian Liberation, Migrant Justice, Vermonters for Justice in Palestine, Vermont and New Hampshire Jewish Voice for Peace, and the Vermont Tempest Collective. Without further ado, and a final reminder to please turn off or permanently mute your devices, welcome Maya Wind.
All right, so first of all, thank you so much, Mandy, for this kind, very generous introduction. Thank you also, first and foremost, to Ann Lipset and the committee of the Will Miller Social Justice Lecture Series. It is really an honor to join the luminary speakers of this series and to be in community with everyone here in Burlington. Thank you also to Helen Scott and to all those who worked to make this event possible, to all the co-sponsors, and particularly I want to just, reiterate a shout out to those comrades of ours at UVM, the Graduate Students United, UVM Staff United, and Students for Justice in Palestine, who I had the opportunity to meet earlier this afternoon, and who we'll be hearing more from today, hopefully soon, so we can dedicate some time, perhaps collectively, to strategy and organizing questions that I think we all share in this room at this moment. Spaces like these are precious, they're fast, and increasingly under siege, so I'm grateful to share this space with everyone here tonight. So thank you again. On the question of Palestine, all right, this We're gonna work out the tech stuff. Yeah, it's gonna be all right. And if at any point you don't hear me, just kind of wave at me and I'll adjust.
Could you?
Okay, and also be on the. Do we want to get the slides up?
Slides up.
Sorry, we're gonna.
Yeah, get closer to the mic.
Even closer. Okay. All right. I will try my best to stay really close. Okay. Okay. On the question of Palestine, our campuses are battlegrounds. We have, of course, long known this, but we are seeing it unfold with new ferocity over the last 2 years, almost. As we see student organizers suspended and expelled, have their degrees and visas revoked, get arrested and lose access to university facilities, and now, of course, abducted, imprisoned, and detained for deportation. This war on students is waged because for almost 2 years, as Israel has escalated its project to annihilate the Palestinian people with the full backing of the United States, these crimes against humanity have been met with unprecedented mobilization. Thousands of students pitched their tents inside buildings and across quads and lawns in over 180 universities and counting around the world, and built people's universities for Gaza, including the University of Vermont. Yeah, we should. Shout out to and I got to hear more about the encampment just earlier today. These encampments were part of an international movement led by students, faculty, and staff, not only for a free Palestine, but to build power to disentangle our universities from imperial warfare and decolonize higher education. This war on universities, while currently escalating, is not new, nor is it confined, of course, to the United States. It is being waged at an international scale, and it extends from our campuses to those in Palestine. And thank you for grounding us, Mandy, but it bears repeating. Israel has targeted and devastated every single Palestinian university in the Gaza Strip. Medical and engineering laboratories, training courtrooms for the faculties of law, assembly and graduation halls, rich collections of rare books and pieces of art, archival and archaeological artifacts, all completely destroyed. Along with decades of Palestinian faculty and student, not only scholarly and academic, but also political life on these campuses that Israel sought to instantly wipe out. So what we have been witnessing across Gaza and the occupied West Bank is not only a genocide, but what Karaman Abusi and Palestinian intellectuals have long called scholasticide. It is not only an attempt by Israel to eliminate the Palestinian people, but to erase centuries of knowledge, culture, and history, central to who they are as a people. And this war on Palestinian education also did not begin now. It has been waged relentlessly for over 76 years, and even before that by the Zionist movement. And this is because Israel, and for the Israeli state, Israel has always understood Palestinian education, as a threat to its rule, and so it has targeted it at every turn. And here we see one of the 12 universities, Al-Aqsa University, in 2024, after its destruction by Israel. And scholasticide cannot be solely understood as a project of the Israeli state, the Israeli military, or even Israeli weapons companies. It is also very much a project that is directly and materially facilitated by Israeli universities. This is very different to how our own institutions of higher education here in the United States narrate Israeli universities. I'm sure we're all familiar with this. They tell us they are beacons of pluralism and democracy, exceptional, in fact, in the landscape of the Middle East. And so we see this in a number of ways, including how Israeli universities have long been awarded study abroad programs, joint research ventures, funding opportunities, when no such, of course it's so obvious, but it really needs to be said again and again, when no such parallel programming is extended to any Palestinian university, or for that matter, any university system in the region. So Israeli universities have been held up as exceptional, singled out, if you will, for special treatment for a very long time. And this is on the basis of this very long-standing Western consensus about this ostensible democracy of Israeli academia. And this consensus is particularly striking given that Palestinians have for over 20 years, over two decades, have called it into question. So in 2004, right, the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, PACB, came into being and called on the international academic community to boycott Israeli universities on the basis of what they articulated at the time as their complicity in Israel's system of oppression against the Palestinian people. So this is a very long-standing campaign. And yet, for a very long time, this is sort of a very different discourse at this moment, but for a very long time, this campaign was slow to shape the public understanding in the West. And so to address this precise gap of the understanding of Israeli universities, I set out on a journey for several years to investigate what this complicity in fact looks like, what shape does it take. And so to do this, I went into Israeli state and military archives to look at official state documents. I spent months browsing through the collections of articles and government reports and media in both the Israeli university libraries and also the Israeli National Library Archive. I also looked at unpublished master's and doctoral theses from within these very universities in the libraries. And I'm trained as an ethnographer, and so I set out across the campuses of Israel's 8 major public universities to not only speak to and accompany Palestinian student organizers and to interview Palestinian and Jewish Israeli faculty and staff, but also to observe for myself classes, discussions, and protests. And what I found over the course of this research is that Israeli universities of higher education are indeed, as PACB long has told us, deeply implicated in Israeli colonialism and apartheid, and really must be understood as settler universities. And what I mean by that, very simply in this context, is that they are embedded in the infrastructure that sustains Israeli society as a settler society. Of course, settler colonial states are always founded with the same objective of eliminating and replacing native peoples to establish a settler nation on native land. And this logic of elimination and replacement is constitutive, too, of the Zionist movement and the Israeli state that it founded. The stated mission of the Zionist movement was to settle in historic Palestine and establish a Jewish majority as the basis of a Jewish state, and it openly called its project the colonization of Palestine. The incremental dispossession that took place over the first decades of this movement was accelerated with the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 through the Nakba, the mass expulsion of over 2/3 of the Palestinian population. After its founding, Israel continued the same demographic territorial program of replacement that it officially renamed Judaization. So I pause here to emphasize this is not a term coined by left academics. This is the official terminology of the Israeli state itself. Judaization is a project of the Israeli state, and this is really just the new terminology that replaced the previous term, which was colonization. And what Judaization really aims to describe is this twin project of continually shrinking lands in Palestinian possession, interrupting Palestinian territorial contiguity, while at the same time continually expanding and dispersing Jewish settlement across historic Palestine. And I speak to you today about Judaization because universities, from the very beginning, have been absolutely central to this project. And this began before the state was even founded. The Zionist movement founded 3 universities as state-building institutions. Hebrew University was the first, established in 1918 as a center for the formation of a new collective Jewish Zionist nation and identity. It was strategically built as a remote outpost at the apex of Mount Scopus to stake symbolic and political but also material claim to the entire city of Jerusalem. The Technion in Haifa and the Weizmann Institute in Rehovot, founded shortly thereafter in the 20s and 30s, were also established as state-building institutions to advance the scientific and technological development of Israel as a Jewish state. And then in the lead-up to the 1948 war, these 3 campuses were directly recruited by the Haganah militia. This is the leading militia of the Zionist movement, later became the foundation of what is today the Israeli military. And the Haganah militia established a science corps that operated bases on these 3 campuses through which to continue to research and refine military capabilities. And faculty and students themselves participated in this, and they developed and manufactured weapons to support Palestinian expulsion, including, there are many examples, but just one to mention in particular is the deployment of biological weaponry to poison their drinking water, to aid in the in the dispossession of the Nakba. This was an initiative headed by a microbiology PhD student at Hebrew University. Since the 1960s, Israel's Judaization program continued to expand on new frontiers, and as it did, new universities were built as regional outposts to anchor these land grabs in regions of particular strategic concern for the Israeli state. So we see this in the largest city of the Galilee, which is the only region within 48 with a Palestinian majority after the Nakba. Israel builds the University of Haifa. And actually, could we have a slide change? This is just one to show you. So one of many projects that the University of Haifa spearheaded was a project called Mitzpim, which is Hebrew for lookouts. And this was a project after Land Day in '76 when the Israeli state was incredibly concerned about Palestinian mobilization in this region of the Galilee. And so they decided to come up with a scheme to establish in a very rapid manner, initially 40, but this number later grew, settlements, and strategically place them in between long-standing cities and Palestinian centers. And then the idea was, and you can see this on the map, the triangles are these new mitzpim, these lookouts that were established, and the kind of round circles around them are indicating the sort of territorial contiguity that they will be creating through this new arrangement. And so the Mitzpim project was developed, designed by urban planners, geographers, demographers at the University of Haifa. It's a celebrated project of this university. And this is just one example of the way that this university has anchored this regional project of Judaization. But it's not just the University of Haifa, it's also likewise, this is in the north, right, in the Galilee. In the center of the Nakab, what Israel has tried to call the Negev, this is the region most sparsely populated by Jewish Israelis in the south. Israel built Ben Gurion University, also as a way to pull more Jewish Israelis from the central cities to the south to aid in the replacement of Palestinian Bedouins. Post-1967, of course, additional frontiers open up, and Hebrew University expands its Mount Scopus campus to the lands of Isawiya and other neighborhoods in occupied East Jerusalem. And of course, most recently, the latest accredited university is Ariel. This is a university built in the illegal settlement of Ariel in the heart of the occupied West Bank, built to help expand the illegal settlement of Ariel, but also to help expand and to legitimize and to solidify Israeli annexation of the West Bank, which is rapidly underway for a long time, but a process that has accelerated very much over the past 2 years. So I tell you this story to illustrate that Israeli universities, from the very beginning, their actual physical campuses were planned, designed, and built as pillars of regional demographic engineering. And so you cannot understand the Israeli university system if you do not begin with this question of land and how they were laid into land very intentionally to aid in this colonial project. Of course, to maintain the military occupation of the Gaza Strip and West Bank, including East Jerusalem, to differentially rule Jewish and Palestinian citizens, as well as Palestinian subjects, has also required new and expanded capabilities for the Israeli state over decades. Israeli universities from the outset immediately stepped in to offer research and expertise required to sustain Israeli apartheid. All public universities in Israel offer their faculty and their facilities for Israeli military training, advancing the career development of security state personnel and soldiers. For soldiers, this is a program called Atuda, which is Hebrew for Academic Reserve. These are specialized degree-granting programs for soldiers run by the Israeli military, the Ministry of Defense, in collaboration with Israeli weapons manufacturers and the Israeli administration for the development of weapons and technological infrastructure. And the Atuda program was developed very explicitly to offer the Israeli military a cadre of highly educated and skilled soldiers amidst what is otherwise a draft of high school seniors. At Tel Aviv University's Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities, soldiers are currently enrolled in the Erez degree program, training to become officers in combat units to be sent to Gaza. The Department of Islamic and Middle East Studies at Hebrew University is currently training intelligence corps soldiers through the degree program Chavatzalot, through which soldiers are offered linguistic and regional expertise to aid in the military rule of Palestinians. And can we have another slide, actually? So this is an interesting photo. This is a photo, this is taken from the Mount Scopus campus, and what you see behind you are the Palestinian neighborhoods of occupied East Jerusalem. And these is a cohort of the Chavas soldiers. So these are student soldiers, right? Soldiers who are active duty, who are now being trained at Hebrew University, and their faces, I did not do that, this is on the website, and the reason that their faces are blurred out is because they're serving for the intelligence, and this is to protect their identity, right? So this is, they have this really cute photo here that they took on the campus. So I think this really illustrates what we're dealing with here. So many Chavas graduates serve in Unit H200 of the Intelligence Corps, which is responsible for decades for the mass surveillance of Palestinians. They collect every Palestinian email, text message, phone call. And also, over the last 2 years, they have created massive target banks to guide Israeli killing of Palestinians in Gaza. On other corners of campus, faculty and students are working tirelessly to develop weapons, in no small part due to lobbying on behalf of university scientists who wanted Israel to design and manufacture its own weapons, rather than just simply import from other countries as it had in its first decade. The Science Corps that was established by the Haganah militia, later became the Science Corps of the Israeli military, was detached from the military and brought under the aegis of the Ministry of Defense, where civilian scientists, including those at universities, could have actually more control. And then it became the national authority for the development of armaments, or in Hebrew, Arashut Halaumit Lepituach Emetsei Lechima. And this will be better known to many of you by its Hebrew acronym, Rafael. So Rafael, Elbit Systems, Israel Aerospace Industries, these are Israel's largest weapons producers, global exporters, were not only birthed by Israeli universities, but continue to be sustained by them to this day, and both military and academic leaders speak to this imbrication and to the absolute necessity of this relationship for the military industries that we have today and their global reach. But it is not only sciences and engineering departments that are conscripted. Diverse academic disciplines, including legal studies, ethics, criminology, archaeology, and Middle East studies, and these are just some that I write about in the book, but there are many others, maintain structural ties and collaborations with the Israeli state, and have themselves become integral sites of knowledge production that maintain Israel's apartheid and project to eliminate the Palestinian people. While examples really abound across the social sciences and humanities, today I'll just detail one, which is the field of legal studies, and how it came to create a discursive, ethical, and legal infrastructure to shield Israel from accountability for its war crimes and crimes against humanity. Israel is an innovator in interpreting international humanitarian law, with the occupied Palestinian territory as its laboratory. Illegally governing the Palestinian people through military occupation for decades, Israel has developed a corpus of laws and legal interpretations to sanction its regime. As legal scholar Noah Erakat shows, this development expanded with rising Palestinian resistance throughout the Second Intifada, which began in 2000. As it waged military campaigns to subdue Palestinian protesters and insurgents, and came under increasing international scrutiny, Israel began to advance arguments that its use of force against Palestinians constituted a new form of warfare, which could not be subject to regulation by existing bodies of law. Over the course of its interpretive innovation since, Israel has created the legal infrastructure to justify extrajudicial assassinations, torture, and deployment of what would otherwise be considered disproportionate use of force against civilian populations. Israeli universities have offered themselves as key sites for this military strategizing and legal innovation. At Tel Aviv University's Institute for National Security Studies, the INSS, scholars and senior security state personnel joined forces to develop legal guidance for the Israeli government and military. During his tenure as INSS director, Israeli Major General Amosi Edlin collaborated with a leading state ethicist and professor of ethics at Tel Aviv University, Asa Kasher, to publish such ethical and legal guidelines for well over a decade. In INSS journals, Kasher and Edlin argue that traditional conceptions about the nature of warfare and how to restrict it do not apply to what they define as Israel's war on terror, and therefore that international law is not the point of departure for what they call Israel's counter-terror doctrine. In this context, they have raised the value of human life to justify greater numbers of civilian deaths, and Kasher even proposed a new category to contravene the legal distinction between combatant and civilian when he coined, and this is well over a decade ago, coined the term third population, which is persons who may potentially interfere with Israeli military operations. in reference to Palestinian civilians. Legal infrastructure developed by faculty and research fellows at Israeli universities consistently shapes Israeli military operations and legitimizes their tactics. This scholarship has worked to shield Israel from accountability, often in direct response to international condemnations or probes, and sometimes even anticipating them during Israeli operations in real time. In May of 2021, the INSS offered a defense of Israel's offensive on the Gaza Strip, even as it was still being carried out, claiming it cleared the threshold of proportionality based on its reading of excessive damage in international humanitarian law. Simultaneously, the INSS works to undermine the legal expertise and legitimacy of international regulatory bodies. In 2022, for instance, it published legal arguments challenging both the ICC's jurisdiction and its definition of war crimes, and offered policy recommendations for the Israeli government to obstruct investigations into Israeli activity in the occupied Palestinian territory on this basis. In 2024, Israeli faculties of law and legal scholars have mobilized explicitly to delegitimize the South African petition charging Israel with committing genocide against the Palestinian people. A number of universities officially condemned the petition and the hearing at the International Court of Justice. And just days after the South African team presented its petition, Tel Aviv University's INSS held an urgent discussion with program director and former head of the Military Advocate General's Corps Department of International Law, Pnina Shalvit-Baruch, as well as senior officials from the Israeli Ministries of Justice and Foreign Affairs. The explicit goal of the discussion was to strategize about how best to discredit the South African petition. This legal scholarship is a crucial weapon. Shalvit-Baruch clarified that Israel understands the international arena as, quote, a battlefield, in which, quote, you have to know the enemy in order to know how to deal with the enemy. Shalvit-Baruch emphasized that what she called irresponsible statements made by Israeli military and state leadership alongside snuff videos released by soldiers and social media were doing great damage and would, quote, be used against us. She was referring to the long and meticulously documented list presented by the South African legal team of dehumanizing statements about Palestinians made by Israeli officials and soldiers alike that could further substantiate the evidence of genocidal intent, which of course is in abundance. Shalvit-Baruch emphasized that what Israelis say aloud is important and will influence not only international lawyers and public opinion, but also the judges of the ICJ. She argued for constructing legal arguments that explain the destruction of Gaza based on claims of threat to Israel rather than what was patently being broadcasted, which is revenge, which for judges and jurists is, quote, not a good enough argument. From a legal perspective, Shalvit-Baruch urged, you cannot now kill thousands of Palestinian children in Gaza because of revenge. This is why the argument that presents the continual threat is very important. For decades, Israeli universities have produced legal scholarship to sanction Israeli crimes against humanity, building the scholarly infrastructure to repeatedly legitimate widely condemned war crimes. And they now facilitate Israeli impunity as it commits the crime of genocide. Universities are not only reproducing Israel's violent machinery, though. They are also defining critical research and discussion of historical and present Israeli state violence as illegitimate and even criminal, and repress any organizing to disrupt it. Universities stifle critical research, pedagogy, and debate, and they suppress Palestinian student mobilization for liberation. So it is important to attend not only to which epistemologies Israeli universities sustain, but also those which they disallow. During the state's first decades, academic disciplines in the Israeli academy so overwhelmingly subordinated their knowledge production to the state and foreclosed Palestinian and critical scholarship that there's very little to speak of. In many ways, the first major opening came in 1978, when materials were declassified in Israeli archives that shed new light on the establishment of the Israeli state. Though these were still largely inaccessible to Palestinian scholars, the declassified documents enabled Jewish Israeli scholars that became known as Israel's new historians to find evidence of the expulsions and some of the massacres that took place over the course of the 1948 war were in fact premeditated and well-planned, and revealed how the new Israeli state immediately moved to permanently prevent Palestinian return to their homes and lands by demolishing entire villages and neighborhoods, and of course establishing a military rule over all those who survived and remained. Of course, Palestinian scholarship on the Nakba and on these very events had already offered a wealth of research on this subject, The Palestinian scholars had deconstructed massacres, they had conducted oral histories, and other types of archival investigation. But this scholarship was pretty much ignored in the Israeli Academy until, that is, Jewish Israelis went into Israeli archives and used Hebrew sources from the Israeli state and Israeli militias to corroborate what Palestinians had long exposed and researched already, right? So this is an important point because this colonial erasure, what Edward Said called, in the context of the US Academy, Israel's greatest epistemological achievement, which is to blot out indigenous Palestinian knowledge. This is very much an ongoing project in the Israeli Academy, as it is here. Nevertheless, with the publication of their first books, the new historians came under fire from Israeli academics, the media, their students, the university administrations, and all but one of them were driven out of the Israeli Academy, and most reside now in the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, to prevent this kind of critical research, the Israeli Ministry of Defense reclassified and methodically concealed hundreds of documents about the Nakba, including many used already by them and referenced by the new historians. These reclassified documents joined millions of other papers that have never been accessible to researchers. Under 3% of the files of the Israeli government archives and under 0.5% of files in the Israeli Defense Forces and Defense Establishment archive have ever been available to the public. And what is important to note about this is that Israeli universities have mounted absolutely no institutional opposition to this very broad and comprehensive state censorship of academic research. In fact, what we have seen is that the Israeli Academy has overwhelmingly coalesced with the state and the rising far right to constrain the right of Palestinian faculty in particular to investigate the founding of the Israeli state, and with it, not only the mass expulsion of the Palestinian people, but their fragmentation, right? Because the Nakba is what led to the very creation of Israeli citizenship for Palestinians. In repressing its study, the Israeli Academy is therefore excluding the most foundational research questions from the Palestinian perspective, an erasure and denial of their very identities as Palestinians. Palestinian critical research, writing, and teaching has been increasingly made untenable. Their epistemology and critique is accused of being political and delegitimized as scholarship. These mechanisms of policing are what Palestinian scholar of education Saleh Abou calls unmarked forms of discipline and punishment. These demands, Palestinian feminist scholars in particular show us, are not only racialized but also gendered. Critical knowledge production about Palestinian women and by Palestinian women is particularly scrutinized in Israeli academia. Palestinian feminist scholars have been discouraged by their departments from writing about gender oppression of Palestinian women if they analyze the colonial structures of violence imposed by Israel on Palestinian women. And this erasure produces what Abou Qidr calls research injustice towards Palestinian women and constitutes a colonial epistemology that de-indigenizes Palestinians. Striving to produce knowledge and to write under these restrictions, one Palestinian scholar described, is to operate in a, quote, mentality of checkpoints. So this is a central mechanism of Israel's continuous war on Palestinian knowledge production and education. This is another facet of scholasticide. So I spoke of Palestinian teachers, but what about the students? The very right of Palestinian citizens to an education itself has never been consensus in Israel. When Palestinians within 48 were themselves under military rule, which was between 1948 and 1966, the Israeli government explicitly debated whether providing Palestinians with an education would ultimately aid in their assimilation and their acceptance of the Zionist project, or would it further politicize them? Ultimately, Palestinian students were allowed very incrementally to enroll in Israeli universities, partially as a mechanism to lower their birth rate. So the argument was better to have a smaller and perhaps more militant Palestinian citizen population because sending Palestinian women to university would potentially aid Israel in curbing the Palestinian birth rate. So the very entry of Palestinian citizens into the Israeli university system itself was part of Israel's demographic calculus. When they did enroll, Israeli universities conditioned this enrollment upon loyalty to the state, and this is again under when Palestinians were still under military rule, collaborating with the Israeli government to surveil Palestinian students and to repress any semblance of organizing. Universities have continued this long tradition to curtail Palestinian students at every point in their educational journey. And this Palestinian Scholars of Education and Palestinian civil society organizations have really produced so much rich evidence documenting this. And we see this in admissions, we see this in physical access to campus and to university housing, we see this in the design and sanctioned use of university space. And as Palestinian students mobilize for liberation on Israeli campuses, university administrations are summoning them to disciplinary committees, refusing to authorize their events, suspending their student groups, and calling the Israeli police and Shin Bet to arrest them. These students, Palestinians whose Israeli citizenship was again itself created as a result of the 1948 war and the Nakba, and many of whom have had families displaced by it, have been restricted in educating their peers about the Nakba or mobilizing for Palestinian return. Palestinian student groups across campuses have faced permit denials, disciplinary hearings, and violent repression of events, vigils and protests commemorating and educating students about the Nakba, in particular on Israeli campuses. Since October 2023, Israeli universities have escalated this campaign to suppress their Palestinian students. For online posts, speech on campus, and political organizing, Palestinian students have faced suspensions, expulsions, order to vacate campus dorms, disciplinary committees by university administrations, and interrogations and arrests by the Israeli police and security forces. With no due process and in a move that the human rights organization Adala has argued is a violation of foundational civil rights, university administrations have accused their students of support for terrorism and referred student cases to the police for criminal investigation and worse. Just 2 days ago, a Palestinian student at Ben Gurion University who was arrested from her campus in 2022 was convicted on charges of incitement to terror for her social media posts. The project to eliminate Palestinians and Palestinian politics, of course, extends from Israeli campuses to Palestinian universities in the occupied Palestinian territory, subjected to structural and bureaucratic violence, routine closures, and raids from their very founding. Palestinian student organizing, likewise, has been criminalized from the very beginning. Since 1967, Israel has declared over 411 student groups and associations unlawful. Palestinian students active in the student council or any student group on any university campus are routinely abducted from their campuses in the middle of the day or from their homes in the middle of the night. They are detained for months under administrative detention without charge or trial, and they are routinely subjected to both physical and psychological torture. In the Gaza Strip, Palestinian universities have been subject to repeated Israeli aerial bombardment and have been suffocated under an illegal siege for 17 years. And this, of course, was all until these last 2 years, when every single one of the universities in the Gaza Strip have been targeted and destroyed by Israeli bombardment or controlled detonation from the ground, which has left over 88,000 students with no physical campus to attend. Not a single one, not one, of the Israeli university administrations has at any point over the last 2 years called on the Israeli government to cease the bombing of Palestinian universities and the intentional decimation of Palestinian higher education. And this, of course, is not coincidental, given that Israeli universities not only sustain Israeli settler colonialism and apartheid for decades, but have been active participants in the project of Palestinian elimination these past 2 years. The mobilization of Israeli universities does not end with their production of scholarship to shield Israel from accountability for its war crimes and crimes against humanity. They have, as the University of Haifa advertised, enlisted for a, quote, war on all fronts. Could I have one more slide? Oh, sorry, that was for the Nakba. I forgot that one. One more. Yeah. So here we have it. The university system worked with the Israeli military and Ministry of Defense to ensure that their students would not need to choose between reserve service and their education. To do this, they granted special benefits, scholarships, and even course credit to reserve soldiers returning from Gaza to their classrooms. So course credit for their labor in Gaza. Not only have they worked to sustain and train soldiers, Israeli universities have developed new weapons used to target Palestinians over the past 2 years. And really, examples abound, but just maybe one. Based on close cooperation with Israeli combat units, students and faculty researchers at Tel Aviv University's Faculty of Engineering developed a control range extension system to enable Israeli soldiers in Gaza to more effectively surveil the land from a distance. Another innovation out of Tel Aviv University, openly advertised engineering war room, to support the Israeli military in Gaza is a camera system to assist soldiers in using dogs for surveillance. Through collaboration with Tel Aviv University, Israeli, and of course all the others as well, Israeli military industries currently develop and refine technologies and weapons used to commit war crimes against Palestinians that have since been sold, as they always are, as battle-proven on this basis. The Israeli Academy is, as Israeli experts themselves attest, the oxygen of Israeli military industries. As part of their effort to reproduce Israeli mass killing and starvation, Israeli universities have served on the front lines to combat the global movement mobilizing to stop it. As the encampments sprung up across campuses here in the United States and across the world, university administrators partner with the Israeli Council for Higher Education and Israeli ministries to launch a full offensive. Millions of shekels in state and philanthropic funding were earmarked to run Hezbollah campaigns. Academic and state bureaucrats were dispatched to lobby foreign governments and scientific agencies, and urgent letters of appeal were sent to university presidents and academic senates. As a human rights law scholar and chair of the newly appointed committee by the Association of University Heads to coordinate these efforts put it, when, quote, when Prime Minister Netanyahu declared that Israel is now fighting a seven-front war, meaning Gaza, Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, the West Bank, and Iran, he could well have added an eighth, academia. They have enlisted their institutes and resources to produce this Hezbollah, Israeli state propaganda, and to defend Israel from international criticism, including direct intervention into the affairs of American campuses and calling on American university presidents to suppress student protesters if needed with violence. Israeli universities, it bears repeating, are complicit in genocide. And our own universities, which fund and support and legitimize them, are implicated. Over the past 2 years, the Palestinian Federation of Unions of University Professors and Employees, as well as every Palestinian student union, have, alongside PACB, reiterated the call to international colleagues, to all of us, faculty, staff, and students, to join the movement to hold Israeli universities accountable for their long-standing, structural, and systematic complicity in Israeli colonialism, apartheid, and now genocide. So I want to end with the words of our colleagues at Riverside University Union of University Professors and Employees in a letter published to all of us last April. Quote, universities are now battlefronts worldwide as we witness the counter-revolutionary forces of fascist rage targeting minds and bodies that refuse to adhere to the bloody world order of white supremacy and the forced ignorance of imperialism. It has never been more true than now. All freedom-seeking people of the world, all voices of righteous humanity, and all of us who covet knowledge in the pursuit of freedom are in this together. We are truly all Palestinians now. No one is free until Palestine is free. Thank you.
Dr. Maya did an incredible research. You know, we always knew about the complicity of the Israeli universities in the occupation, and she really documented it amazingly. And we bought her book, and we are going to study it very carefully. But we were glad that we were here.
Things are starting to move here, and I'm hoping that we will have protests at some of the factories here in the Burlington area that are making weapons that are being sent to Israel to kill people. They are being made here in our city, and it's time for us to wake up to that.
I was really inspired by the speaker. She did a phenomenal job in presenting a very detailed history of the way that universities in Israel, and particularly the leadership of those universities, have shaped opinion in this country and made it very difficult to organize real solidarity with the Palestinian people. I was just talking to people from my union, and we all feel like our resolve to end our university's complicity in Israel's genocide in Gaza has been tripled from the event. So really appreciative of her being here.
I thought it was really powerful. I think Maya Wind is an incredible lecturer and a great activist, and her book and her previous research reports have been great at explaining conceptually a lot of the underlying ties and statistical ties between Israeli universities and the act of genocide, as well as the collaboration and use of the United States empire and United States universities working within that same system. She does a really great job at explaining that and also giving space for Palestinian voices to take the lead in terms of figuring out what needs to be done, because at the end of the day, it's not a choice that we should be making or should be deciding. We should be supporting the people in Palestine and helping to work to build a better future for them and for us, and to stop that complicity. So I thought she did a really great job at explaining that, and yeah, it was a great night.